This episode and others like it are made possible by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help me make more content like this, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. If you were to ask a handful of Americans what makes their country so special, odds are most of them would respond, our freedom. If you were to press them on the issue and ask why we experience such freedom, their answer would probably be something about the founding fathers, our strong military, and capitalism. Now, this video is not about the various global freedom rankings, in which America performs poorly compared to other wealthy nations. You can look those up on your own time. What I want to focus on is the adversarial relationship between our capitalist system and personal freedom. For decades now, the words capitalism and freedom have been treated as synonyms. But over the course of this video, I hope to show you that capitalism doesn't enable freedom at all. In fact, it actively suppresses it. This may sound like a strange claim, but bear with me. I think you'll come around by the end. Before we begin, we need to have a deeper understanding of freedom than simply, I get to do what I want. Let's start with the concepts of positive and negative freedom. Positive freedom is having the capacity to act according to one's free will. I get to do what I want is an expression of positive freedom. Negative freedom, on the other hand, is the freedom from coercion by others. One example of this would be the freedom to speak freely without fearing retribution from the state. These two types of freedom can be summed up as freedom to and freedom from. They often get tangled up and end up in conflict with one another, as in the gun rights example, I have the right to carry a gun in public versus I have the right to walk around without the threat of being shot. There will always be disagreement surrounding the issue of which form of freedom should take precedent. But the point of this video is that capitalism suppresses both forms. Let's take a capitalist economy as an example. Would you say that this kind of economy offers a positive or negative freedom as its value proposition? A positive freedom would be, I am entitled to a guaranteed fair share of the economy. That doesn't fit. What about a negative freedom? I am entitled to operate in the economy without coercion by powerful groups. That's closer, and that's how free market enthusiasts have chosen to describe the freedom afforded by capitalism. Here's the problem. Those people see the government as the only entity capable of exerting control over the economy. Government power is significant, but in today's hyper-capitalist economies, the governments themselves are beholden to the ultra-rich and massive multinational corporations. Capitalism not only fails to guarantee its people a fair share of the economy, positive freedom, it also fails to prevent the meddling of disproportionately powerful entities in the economy, negative freedom. Tax laws are always written to benefit the top 1%, energy policies always benefit massively wealthy fossil fuel companies, despite their effect on the climate. Why? Because the ultra-wealthy have bought both major political parties in the US. This is a direct result of runaway capitalism. The accumulation of obscene levels of wealth in the hands of a tiny fraction of the population has created an owner class with godlike power. Let's take another example. America has a for-profit healthcare system. It's incredibly lucrative, worth a staggering $3.65 trillion as of 2018. In a humane system, average people would be able to afford medical treatment. They could go to the emergency room without the fear of racking up tremendous medical debt. That's not the case in America. Before the pandemic hit, there were over 137 million Americans struggling to pay their medical bills. Again, that was before the pandemic. We've had 6.5 million confirmed cases of COVID since then, and hospital stays are incredibly expensive. The fact that we have so many people having to choose between going bankrupt and risking dying of preventable medical conditions is a damning indictment of our capitalist system. By choosing profits over all else, our hyper-capitalist healthcare industry has limited our freedom to reasonably priced care and our freedom from the fear of bankruptcy for basic health services. You have the freedom to start a business, but the end goal of capitalism is ever-increasing profits, and your business will likely fail as our system refuses to provide a level playing field. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses have been destroyed by the pandemic, but the country's billionaires and wealthiest corporations have seen a dramatic increase in net worth. Why? Because they were taken care of. They were bailed out or able to capitalize on the suffering of others. As of June, the country's wealthiest people had gotten $637 billion richer over the course of the pandemic. Capitalists applaud the fact that anyone can start a business. But how can you compete against these corporate leviathans that monopolize the economy and can demand whatever legislation they want from those in power? There's no freedom there for the average person. Okay, but what about the job market? Free market enthusiasts will say that relationships between workers and employers are free and equal. If you hate your job, you have the freedom to leave and find another one. But if small businesses can't pay you a decent wage because they can't compete, and large companies are all trying to maximize profits by cutting costs and extracting as much labor from their workers for as little money as possible, you're unlikely to find a job that will offer a living wage. To make matters worse, capitalism treats basic necessities like commodities. Healthcare, food, water, shelter. These things can all be exploited to make a profit. The average American is compelled to sell their labor and hours of their life for whatever wage they can find simply to cover the skyrocketing cost of housing. That's not freedom. That's coercion. Take the workplace itself. You are subjected to the whims of the employer, no matter how demeaning or unfair. Constant schedule changes, demands to come in to cover a shift, restriction of freedom of speech. You are completely at the mercy of someone who can fire you for any reason or no reason at all simply because you cannot afford not to work. The vast majority of people don't have the luxury of taking time off to find another job, because that would likely mean missing a rent payment. You will be kicked out of your home and starve if you don't engage in the soul-crushing meat grinder that is the American labor market. That's not freedom. I can hear it now. If you don't like it, you can just leave. How? How can the average American disengage with this coercive system? Even if you wanted to, say, live on your own land and produce your own food, thereby removing the power of the coercive capitalist system. In order to escape, you need capital. You need enough money to buy the land, which is already impossible for most people, then the funds to build a home, however small, and acquire supplies to grow food, find a way to collect water, and so on. The problem is, there's no way for the average American to accumulate that kind of money. The vast majority of capital is concentrated at the very top, and it's only getting worse. In 2019, the richest person on the Forbes Top 400 list was 21 times wealthier than the richest person on the list in 1982, adjusted for inflation. That money isn't just coming out of thin air. It's being siphoned from the rest of the population. That money also is not going back into the economy. It's being hoarded and used to buy legislation favorable to giant corporations. Meanwhile, real wages have gone down, unions have been all but eradicated, preventing collective bargaining for better treatment, and most people can't cover a surprise $400 expense. You don't even have the freedom to disengage from the capitalist system. This system, and by extension your life, is owned by the ultra-wealthy. This is the logical conclusion of capitalism, and decades of consolidation of wealth and power in the hands of an increasingly small number of oligarchs. Capitalism cannot solve these problems because it doesn't recognize them as problems. The system is designed to allow for maximization of profit and will always yield monopolies and vast inequality. Corporations like Amazon can end careers and the future of entire cities by picking up and moving to a better tax haven. And they will, every time, because it makes them more money. Living your life at the mercy of the owner class doesn't sound like freedom to me. The vision of a free America and opportunity for all doesn't exist. Our lives are becoming less and less free. We have less time to spend with our loved ones, less money to put away for the future. Our life expectancy is decreasing. We can't get medical treatment because it will bankrupt us. We can't start a business because it will be crushed by the major players or left to die when the next pandemic comes along. And the government will always side with the ultra-wealthy instead of the average American because both parties are entirely bought and paid for. At this point in history, there is nothing capitalism can offer us that a more humane system could not. It's just a matter of realizing that we've been conditioned by decades of propaganda to see capitalism as a synonym for freedom. Capitalism does not provide freedom. It suppresses it. Okay, so what's the solution? That depends on who you ask. Some people think we can reform the system at the ballot box. Others think electoral politics is a dead end. The means may not be clear, but the end goal is. We need to replace capitalism with a system that values human life over profits. One that actually does expand our freedoms and provides every person with a life of dignity. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that I think socialism is the answer. Look at the things we have today that are a direct result of socialist policy. Child labor laws, the weekend, the 40-hour work week, Medicare, Social Security, workplace safety laws, the 8-hour workday, and many others. Look at this list. Does anything stand out to you? Besides being staples of modern life, each of these policies defies the capitalist goal of profit over all else. Children were great workers because they were small enough to crawl inside giant factory machines and you could pay them less. We're used to an 8-hour workday today, but in the past, people would work 12 hours or more in a shift. Making workplaces safer was expensive, and business owners didn't want to do that. Without socialists and other leftists fighting to keep capitalism from going completely off the rails, we'd be in an even worse place than we are today. Human life is infinitely more valuable than corporate profits. Many Americans are finally beginning to see that the system doesn't work for them, that it's built on the exploitation of their labor, that they will never reap the benefits of their own hard work. By its very definition, capitalism demands a weakening of democratic systems and the suppression of the vast majority of people. Capitalism is not freedom. Capitalism is the enemy of freedom, and it needs to go. We can choose to replace it with a system that strengthens democracy and expands individual freedom, where we're not held hostage by obscene housing, education, and healthcare costs. where the ultra-wealthy no longer have complete control over government. We can say no more to the two-party corporate duopoly and demand representatives who cater not to special interests, but to the average citizen. We can build a system that cares for the survivability of the planet and the future of all people. A system that is truly worthy of being called free. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that this kind of content is supported by my patrons on Patreon. This type of video, while very important, is something that sponsors won't touch. In order to pay the bills and keep this channel running, I rely on AdSense revenue, sponsors, and donations from generous viewers. By producing explicitly anti-capitalist content, I lose out on both sponsors and AdSense. If you enjoy the kind of videos I'm producing and you're able to chip in even $1 a month, I would greatly appreciate the support. You can find my Patreon page at patreon.com/secondthought. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my previous content by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.